I was on vacation. I was working for a staffing company. Like I would find people to go work their different jobs. And anyway, I was working like 70 hours, 80 hours a week. I was exhausted.
Oh,
I was underpaid. Took a trip up to Alaska to see my sister. It was a family trip. And I read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and
oh,
The Hunger Games.
yeah.
Yeah, so I read those and I got on the plane at the end of the trip and I said, I could do that. I mean, I could do something like that. I
Mhm.
could write books.
Welcome to Story Power, a bi monthly podcast where my guests and I chat about stories and creativity in all different styles and formats. My name is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden, and my goal is to promote what Dale Carnegie stated in his famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. He said, instead of condemning people, let's try to understand them. Let's try to figure out why they do what they do. That's a lot more profitable and intriguing than criticism, and it breeds sympathy, tolerance, and kindness. To know all is to forgive all. It's my firm belief that the goal of most creative people is to try to understand themselves and others. That's what makes artwork of all kinds so compelling. But more than that, the personal stories of my guests promote understanding as well. Roger C. Schenck, a cognitive scientist, said, human beings are not ideally set up to understand logic. They are ideally set up to understand stories. It's my hope that Story Power will help us understand each other better by sharing the stories of my guests. So today I'm talking to Tyler Schwanke, and Tyler has a lot of hats that he wears. Tyler, I know you probably want to talk about your first novel, mostly, but pick any of your jobs, like your filmmaking, your short stories, all of that. Anything you want to talk about, I'm up to listen to. So I'll let you have the floor or the screen.
Yeah, sure. Well, thank you for having me. Yeah, I have an interesting kind of path to get to novel writing. So, you mentioned filmmaking, short stories. I think, for me, it's been a long time kind of coming to what is the best medium for me to tell stories.
Mhm.
Because it's something where, just as a child, I mean, I've always been huge into reading, been big into movies. But like when I was like in elementary school, like the thing for us to do was, my family would go up to our lake place. And
Mhm.
honestly, like my parents would just be like, this is it. We're going to sit by the beach for like 4 days and we're bringing a stack of books and you got to entertain yourselves. And so I would bring a couple like Goosebump books, but then I would get into, like the John Grishams my mom was reading. I read Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton when I was like in
Mhm.
second grade, which is a pretty early age. You know, uh,
Scary, scary.
yeah, I read. My dad has always been the biggest Stephen King fan, so I read The Shining in like third grade, and and these are just things that I just really loved. Bigger books, it was like
Mhm.
that sort of pride when you're 8 years old and you're carrying around a big thick book. Um, and just over time in high school, I started kind of dabbling, just making like small little videos in my visual
Mm.
literacy class. Decided to go to film school, worked on short films, got to do a lot of student short films, different festivals across the country. And then really just kind of decided to make the transition from movies into books when
Mm,
I
mhm.
this is about mid 20s, um, and it really just kind of came down to, as smug as this sounds, I was on vacation. I was working for a staffing company. Like I would find people to go work their different jobs, and anyway, I was working like 70 hours, 80 hours a week. I was exhausted.
Oh,
I was underpaid. Took a trip up to Alaska to see my sister. It was a family trip, and I read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and
oh,
The Hunger Games.
yeah. All of
And
them? All of the Hunger Game ones?
Just the first one on that trip.
Oh,
I
okay.
have read them all. I read the
Yeah.
prequel. That's
And
very good.
all the girl with the dragon tattoo books too. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So I read those, and I got on the plane at the end of the trip, and I said, I could do that. I mean, I could do something like that. I
Mhm.
could write books, and um, yeah. So I started. Um, I jumped right into it, and I wrote a novel. It was a YA novel about time traveling aliens. It kind of had the same premise as like Terminator, but instead of time
Oh.
traveling machines, they were time traveling aliens. But
Uh-huh.
everything else was pretty similar.
Mhm.
And didn't find an agent, but it just, for me, that was great practice, and I had
Yeah.
so much fun writing that book, and like learning about character development, and
Mhm.
when to cliffhangers, right? And at the end of
Right.
your chapters, and just all these different things that um were just kind of, I was aware of them, obviously, but I'd never gotten to try that kind of stuff myself in a story, in a fiction format. So
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, so I just really fell in love with the medium of novel writing. And for me, it really comes down to, so my first draft is just, it can be anything and everything. That's what I've allowed
Mhm.
myself to do, right? Like I outline pretty heavily, um, but in that out, even with that outline, if I have something and the character's saying that's not what I'm going to do, I don't care what your outline says. I go with the character, right? And you
Yeah,
have
right.
to.
Yeah.
Um, but really, for me, it's like I don't work so well with like a big, huge blank page. I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do with this?
Mhm.
Um, but I tend to overwrite a lot, which helps me,
Mhm.
because then I would take this first draft and write, I'm at 160,000 words,
Mhm.
and not all of them are great, right? But maybe like 70,000 words are pretty good. And I can cut, edit, condense, rework, vamp up, and that's
Mhm.
when, that to me is like the fun process of writing, and that's what I really enjoy. And I think it came from, it's the same kind of thing when it comes to film. Like, you go out and you shoot a bunch of stuff, and then you
Right.
take it back to the editing and you look at it and you go, okay, what's my best stuff? And how can I, this is the story I wanted to tell. This is what I actually have, right? I went and I shot it.
Mhm.
Maybe I didn't
Mhm.
get a shot I wanted, or maybe I didn't have, and that's where you get to cheat a little bit when it comes to writing, because if you didn't have something, you can quickly do it, right? When in
Mhm.
film, or TV, you have to go back on set to get those extra stuff, and that's a lot of money, and sometimes it's just not possible. So, but I learned from that, saying, okay, this is what I have, this is what I want. How can I make this work? And then, what pieces can I move around and stuff. So I really think that the filmmaking background translated well for me when it
Yes.
comes to the novel writing. And
Yeah.
also, I'm a very visual person, so my descriptions and the way
Mhm.
that characters see the world, it's very, a lot of visual elements and components to it. Um, so yeah, so that's how I got here today.
Well, that's I can relate to that because the creating the story part is the hard part for me.
Sure.
And then when it gets to the editing, it's like, oh, good, I can move things around and
Hmm.
you know, yeah, and I do that too. Probably because my background's in theater and I'm used to writing all these character background story, backstory kinds of things. And I sometimes I write those and then I go, well, I can't put that in the novel. So so I have to cut it out, but at least I
Sure.
know it. And
Hmm.
that's kind of how I think that authors know things and maybe they have a little indication, a line here or a line there that indicates all that backstory stuff. So your first novel is Breaking In. Can you talk about that? Because I didn't get to go look at it, at what
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
about.
Absolutely. So it is what I like to call a uh, comic coming of age crime caper. It features around Millie Blomquist. She's a 17-year-old film student from Fargo, North Dakota,
Uh-huh.
and
Mhm.
Millie writes. Uh, so Millie's like lifetime goal is to be a movie director. She has
Oh,
a deep love of films, mainly crime films, and this comes from watching them as a child with her dad, who um, she always thought he was just kind of this kind of boring guy who, struggled kind of keeping his marriage together, wasn't always the greatest father, but had a lot of love for Millie and her
mhm,
mom, right? And tried really, really hard. And a couple years prior to when the book starts, during COVID, Millie's dad he is a security guard at a bank, and he gets roped into a heist where he's
oh,
going to be the kind of inside man to let these crooks into this bank to rob it, and he's killed in the process. And so, as a way to process this, Millie creates this script about her dad and putting the heist together, but kind of like an alternative history, right? Instead of him like tragically dying, the rest of the crew all kind of um, they all kind of fall under this what I like to call kind of like the bad fortune when you pull off a heist. You get away with the money, but you don't really get away with it. All this terrible stuff happens to you. So she writes this script and she goes to this film school. And because of her age, it's more like a film camp. It's a 10-week
mhm,
film
mhm.
camp where they have this project, where they have this competition, excuse me, where you submit a feature length script and then you make a short film based upon that script. And then at the end of the summer, they screen the short films, and then the winner gets a $500,000 budget to make the short film into a feature. So
Oh,
there's movies that have done this, like the most
mhm,
famous example um, is Whiplash with Miles Teller. That
mhm,
started as a short film. I think it was NYU, and
mhm,
then later on
mhm.
became so. That's kind of the idea behind it. But before the summer's over, Ricky O'Neill, who is Millie's favorite director, reason why she went to this school, the school closes down because Ricky's been charged with stealing tuition dollars from the students. So over pricing them, um, basically just stealing from them. So the school closes down. 7 months later, Millie is in Fargo. She's watching the coming of attractions for before a movie, and she looks up and she sees a preview for the new Ricky O'Neill movie, and it's exactly what she shot, parts what she shot for her short film,
Mhm.
and is the movie that's coming out is her script. So the way that the school is set up, there's a legal loophole where he can make the script, he can claim ownership and doesn't have to give her any credit.
Mhm.
But instead, so she goes to him, tries to get him to give her credit. He declines, but throws her $20,000 in hush money to go away, to not bring
Mm.
this up. And instead of taking that money and hushing, she takes her film crew, turns them into a heist crew, and they make a plan to steal the movie 3 days before the premiere and then hold it for ransom. So that's the that's the setup. That's the what the story is about. So it's really a love letter to filmmaking, to heist movies, but also to being young and youthful and literally doing anything you can to make your dreams come true,
Yeah.
even if it includes felony breaking and entering. So
Well, and
yeah,
it seems like that whole idea of stealing somebody else's idea, it shows up in a lot of movies.
sure,
I'm thinking of Working Girl, how her, Melanie Griffith's ideas are stolen by Sigourney Weaver's character.
yeah.
Um, yeah, and I don't know if you've ever seen that movie.
I've
And
never seen Working Girl, no, but
oh
on the
yeah,
list, on the list.
yeah, it is, it's about, the financial world,
Hmm,
stocks and bonds and businesses and, buying and selling businesses and stuff. But yeah,
sure.
so I've seen that, but I've seen that kind of thing. And how does your character deal with having her idea stolen? I mean, I always love those kinds of stories. How do they
Yeah,
deal with it?
right. Yeah. So I
Yeah.
think, with her, she's put so much of herself into this, right? And it's banked so much on this, so she can't just let it go. Also,
Right.
because there's the emotional angle with her father, right? So somebody else is telling her dad's story
Right.
when that's what she wanted to do. So it's this kind of fine line, for her
Mm,
of
yeah.
you know can't let this go because of my professional career, but also because of personal reasons. So there's a lot at stake for her.
Yes, really. So, um, are you doing writing exclusively now and giving up the filmmaking?
So I haven't, yeah, I primarily am working on novels at this time.
Mhm, mhm.
Definitely script writing, filmmaking is something that I'd love to get back in. I have plans. I will get back into it at some point. But really, right now, I'm just focusing all my efforts on the next book. Still spreading the word about breaking in. It's been
Yes.
out for close to a year. Been about 2 weeks. It'll been out for a year, so I'm incredibly proud of that. And it's out
Mhm,
there, and it's
mhm.
still finding new readers. But um, I'm working up on follow ups, not a sequel, but similar in vein,
Mhm,
kind
mhm.
of comic thrillers, and then just really trying to make it as a writer.
Yeah. So, do you have a side job? Writing is your full-time job, your
I mean,
profession.
technically, writing would be my side job. I have a full time job. I work 40 hours a week. So I
Uh-huh.
find, I'm a writer. I write every day. I write two
Mhm,
hours in the morning. I get up
mhm,
earlier to get, to get that.
mhm.
Because I found that I'm someone that after a long day at work, you're
It's
just
too
drained,
hard.
right? Yeah,
Yes.
there's no energy to be creative. So
Yeah.
I for me, and it's too important not to work on, so that's why I
Yeah.
like to do it first thing in the morning.
Yeah, it's kind of, well, I don't know about anybody else, but it seems when I'm doing a creative project, it's so much easier to switch from that creative project to doing something mundane like cleaning
Right.
a house or I'm retired now. So or teaching a class. I used to teach college. And so yeah, I understand that. I understand the end of the day is it you just want to relax.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now, you have some short films that you made that won awards, right?
Yeah, I have, so primarily a lot of my filmmaking time was either I went to the New York Film Academy, which was they have
Mhm,
locations across country, but um, I went to their Union Square location. So I lived in Brooklyn, so in New York. But
mhm.
then my undergrad is in filmmaking from Moorhead University, which is in the Fargo Moorhead area.
Uh-huh.
So
Uh-huh.
I'm very similar to Millie, where
Mm,
I wasn't raised in Fargo, but I'm a Midwest kid. I live in Minneapolis now.
mhm,
I went to school up in Fargo, school in New York. So I had some student films from both programs that have been in student film competitions. Some of them won like best of either student category or um, you know of, of the festival, and then
mhm.
yeah, I've done that in my past, and those can now be found on YouTube.
That's cool. Yeah. So is it under your name?
Yep, yep,
Okay, good.
everything is under Tyler Schwanke. I don't use
Okay.
a pseudonym.
Yeah, me either. I don't know why. Uh, maybe because I sort of had one when I was a kid. My name's Lucinda, and so people wanted to call me Lucy, and my parents didn't want them to call me Lucy, so
Mhm.
they nicknamed me Cindy. And I always know the age of my friends because if they call
Well, how
me
they do
Cindy,
that?
yeah,
Yeah.
I know they're old friends. So I have a question about your when you get a number of books done, do you think you'll turn them into screenplays?
Oh, I'd love to. Yeah, I mean, that would really, I mean, I think for me, when I'm putting them together, when I'm putting the novels together, I mean, I very much see them
Mm.
as doing double duty, that these can make movies, can make, series on streaming sites.
Mhm.
I think what I love about the novel writing component is, for until you get to the point where your agent needs a way an editor, there's a lot that's done that can be done on your own.
Right.
Um, so I and that's one thing that I really enjoy about being a novelist. Um, when it comes to being a filmmaker, like that just doesn't work. And that's exciting too. It's the collaboration and
Mm.
seeing
Mhm.
kind of what you create and how it's interpreted by others. So I would love to like be a part of that process, but also like I get really excited about the idea of like somebody, taking my script, taking my story and telling it through a different lens. And for
Oh.
me, that sounds really enticing, right?
Mhm,
I
mhm,
think a lot of times you hear, or just kind of the general consensus is when they make a movie out of a book. Sometimes the author is like, "Oh, they weren't true to my vision,"
mhm.
or they messed it up, and that happens, right?
Right.
But I also think there's something a little bit boring about being too true to the book, where
Mhm.
because they're different mediums for a reason. They both have their benefits.
Right.
And I just don't think you can properly tell a story, the exact same story in a novel form as you can in a movie.
I
A
know.
series, perhaps,
Yes.
but I think you need to take the pros that come with screenwriting, with movie making, because I think there's something really special there about having to condense, use your imagination, let the audience decide some of it for themselves.
Mhm.
And so I would love for, my books to make the transition. I'd love to be part of that, but at the same time, I'd also really love to just kind of learn and observe, right, on how that
Mhm.
process is done
Mhm.
and what it looks like.
Yeah. I think it was both Diana Gabaldon and, Julia what's her last name that did the Bridgerton series? Both of those authors said, "Oh, yeah, I love being a collaborator with them, but
Sure.
I love watching the creators take my stories and expand upon them."
Yeah.
And I think is that what you're saying? You like
It
that?
is, yeah. I would
Yeah.
love to see that process work and to see, you know, other people weigh in and there is something about this story in particular. It's about a young woman who was, wronged by a very powerful,
Mhm.
white guy and
Mhm.
and takes advantage. And I think there's just so much about the filmmaking world, Hollywood, right? It's about, well, just really, it's hard. You can't pick an industry where it's completely fair, right, between men and women. So there's that component too,
Mhm.
where
Mhm.
women are not given the correct due. And so I would
Mhm.
love, part of me would love to see, this, if it was Breaking In was made a movie, to see, a female filmmaker, a director,
Yeah.
a
Mm.
screenwriter, right? To be part of that, to add
Mhm.
that, that component to it, which I think just elevates it to a different level, and again, kind of expands on what I've done.
Yeah. Now, I've never asked a male author this, but
All
I
right.
did but my sister and her, and my niece, I was up at their house, in March because my mom died at the end of February, and we were
Well, I'm
watching
sorry to hear that.
well, she had been sick for a long time. So,
Mhm.
yeah, but we were watching something, and I just out of the blue, I said, do stories that are female driven do they have a different sensibility than male driven stories? And they immediately said yes. And
Mhm.
so I was wondering if you had that same viewpoint. Are female driven stories, do they have a little bit different sensibility
Can
about
you
them?
expand? Can you expand what you mean by sensibility?
Well, I'm a very empathetic person, so the
Mm,
feel of them, the feel of the story, the way the women deal with their issues is
sure.
different than
Yeah, I would agree that there does seem to be a difference in the sensibilities. I think empathy is right on the correct word for how I would explain it, because I
Mhm.
think right now, so well in the past, so when did the Me Too movement? That was 2018, I think.
Yeah,
So I mean that was
2017, 2018,
26,
yeah.
right? So it's been a while, and we're still in the process of having to try to make more popular,
Mhm.
stories about women that aren't given their proper due, people of color who have had to overcome you know tremendous obstacles,
Yeah.
and I think when we're telling those stories, especially right now, but not it's not specific to now. I mean, we've seen this in the past too, but I think there is that um, bit of empathy that we are hoping the audience feels
Mhm.
for these characters,
Mhm.
for women characters, and they're having to deal with these, you know, extra obstacles which really shouldn't be there. Those are obstacles that society has put in play, right? We don't
Mhm.
give enough credit
Mhm.
uh, to women for their credentials, for what they've achieved. We don't pay the same. So yeah, I would say that there are different sensibilities, because just where we're coming from when it comes to, men's stories, they don't have, unless it's a very specific male, maybe, if you're dealing with like a class issue or something like that, but
Mhm. Mhm.
they're not dealing with the same sense of obstacles that women and people of color,
Mhm.
and and that expands to uh, the gay community as well. A lot of
Mhm.
unrepresentative represented, excuse me, populations.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say that there's different sensibilities, because we're hoping that the audience will achieve, or come to a realization that maybe they haven't before.
Mhm. Yeah, that's right, yeah. So do you have any contacts? Well, you probably have contacts, but I mean in the bigger Hollywood, you know, uh, world. Not that you have to, but I was just
Yeah.
wondering.
Well, I've got so part of my publisher has a director of media development, so he's out
Uh-huh.
there. Do
Oh.
I personally have like Steven Spielberg's number or anything? No, I don't. I know people that work in LA, that work in movie making. Um, some that are directors and
Mhm,
on kind of more lower budget type films.
mhm, mhm.
But nothing that would I have enough to be able to bounce ideas off of, make sure I'm being true when I talk
Yeah.
about certain things, but um yeah, I don't have the money man yet.
Yeah, really. Oh boy. It's hard to break in, I think. It must be.
Hmm.
I mean, I considered being a professional actor for about a minute.
Mm.
Uh, but I was married and it takes so much time
Hmm.
to do that. And so I decided to abandon that idea and then I got to teach it. So it was like, oh, that's good. Yeah, that's kind of the best of both worlds.
Hmm.
So, and I am a movie lover as well. When you were describing um Millie, is that her name, Millie?
Hmm. Yep.
Yeah, Millie and her dad. My dad and mom instituted movie night because he had dyslexia and he couldn't read stories to us at night. It was
Hmm.
difficult for him to read out loud. He did teach himself how to read, but reading out loud was really difficult. But he wanted us to understand about human nature. And so we'd watch these movies from when we were a little kid, and then we'd talk about them. What was your favorite part? Who were your favorite characters? And we could ask questions about why did this character do that thing? And so for years and years and years, I was analyzing stories, and I think that that's just one of the great ways to connect with other people
Hmm.
c- and understand other people and understand yourself. And so, and it goes that way for books too. We have a family book club group and with a few extraneous people. thrown in.
Mhm.
And,
Hmm.
we just love talking about the book that
Mhm.
we've chosen that for that period, whenever. So, yeah, I love talking books, movies, television shows. Yeah.
Same. Yeah.
So when you go out with your friends to a movie, do you stand around and talk or go someplace and talk about it after you've watched it or a television show?
Oh, sure. I mean, yeah, there's plenty of critique, plenty to discuss.
Mhm, mhm,
Um, there's been a lot of really great films on the last couple of years.
mhm,
Specifically, I think horror right now is really exciting. I think a lot of it's under appreciated when it comes to a lot of what directors are doing, but
mhm,
movies like Midsummer,
mhm.
um, just like the amount of control that the director is showing in that, and just it's just so creepy and just so incredibly well done. So yeah, definitely there's been a lot to discuss over the last couple of years.
That's cool. Yeah. It's always fun to have somebody to discuss stories with, I
Hmm.
think. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think despite the intentions of an author and what they he or she puts into the story, not one person has the same experience,
Mhm,
right?
mhm,
Because we're all bringing different
mhm.
you know backgrounds to that story, so we're all interpreting it in a
Right.
different way. So again, it might come down to like the sensibilities might all be there, and we might be able to relate to that or understand that or identify that. But again, a lot of it comes down to kind of our own personal history and how we respond to it.
Right, and it's always interesting to hear what people get out of the story. I mean, I read reviews sometimes of television shows and movies, and, man, I had to defend the Marvels on my Apple subscription because
Mm.
it's all these, oh, this movie's a mess. Well, of course it's a mess. You got three superheroes who, when they use their superpowers, they're switching places, so it seems like it's a mess, but it's one of those that if you watch it more than once, you start to understand it better.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, I had to write a review for Internet Movie Database.
Which
Defend
one? Which one were you defending?
the Marvels. The
Oh, the Marvel.
Marvels.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I liked the Marvels. I didn't like the last Ant-Man. That was a mess. That one.
I haven't seen that one. Yeah.
It was like a Star Wars type movie where they're because what was it? They get sucked into I can't remember what that place is called.
Oh, yes, I did
Um,
see that one. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. I didn't like it. That one I didn't like. The Marvels I liked. I thought it was fun. I liked the scene where the three of them are all like fighting other people, and then
Yes.
I can't remember what the trigger was, but then they would all move, right? And the next thing you know, they're dealing with
Yes.
others. Yeah, that was a
Mhm.
fun sequence. It was a good
Well,
movie.
and I love to listen to the special features, or commentaries, and the director was talking about how they had to how they were meticulous, they were in planning that whole thing out.
Oh, I would imagine. Yeah.
So that the actors knew what what they were supposed to be doing in the new fight scene.
Hmm.
Yeah. And that's the kind of thing that I think is so fun is that movie makers are meticulous and
Hmm.
authors are meticulous about their storytelling. So we have about 5 minutes left. Do you have anything you want to say?
Um, well, I guess so as I have a lot to say. I guess as far as like I would remember just kind of learning about the show and one thing about is how to kind of break in how to make time
Hmm.
especially if you're dealing with other jobs and I alluded to earlier about just because writing it's something that I treat like a full-time job, but I still
Hmm.
have a full-time job.
Hmm.
And you had mentioned, earlier you wanted to be an actress and it's not like you were busy at the time. There's never I guess I just want to say like there's never not going to be a time where you're not a busy person.
Right.
Like there's always going to be reasons not to do something.
Hmm.
Um
Hmm.
and I say that as someone who graduated from an MFA program and I had a blast in my program. It was great to get to know, to work towards something. But really, I just wanted to connect with other writers, and I just wanted to,
Mm.
to workshop stuff, talk about ideas,
Mhm.
and that's the part for me that was, the most exciting and what I miss most about the program. But I met a lot of great writers in those classes that from one reason or another, have never finished their book or have never, sent it off to an agent or,
Mhm.
have never gone past chapter 5 because they keep reworking the same thing over and over again. And,
Mhm.
I would just say, that's fine if it works for you, but if you, are seriously thinking that you'd like to write a novel, you want to get it out there,
Mhm.
published or not, just, that in itself is a huge accomplishment. So if that's where you're at in your journey, I applaud you. If you're
Mhm.
not, find the time, really dedicate yourself to getting that done because nobody else is going to do that for you.
That's right.
And I think you'd be surprised by, once you get going, how much it drives you. And for me, it's like if I don't write in a day, and there's Christmas, there's holiday, like, I'm not super strict about it, but if there's a day where there's not something huge going on that prevents me from writing and I don't write, I don't
Mhm.
think that's happened in a decade. But if it did, I would feel super guilty about it, right? And it's just something that it just becomes more ingrained with you the more and more you do it.
Mhm.
So, this if you want to be a writer, just be a writer.
That's right.
If I can be a writer, you can be a writer. I
That's
promise
right.
you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I hope you enjoyed the show. If you like what you heard, please share it with a friend and give us a rating and or review on your favorite podcast app. It will help people find us. I invite you to join my Patreon community at patreon.com/storypower, all one word. Or if you like, you can subscribe to Story Power on Apple Podcasts. It's my aim to build a community where we discuss the stories we love and talk about what we learned from them. I offer extra audio content and story suggestions to my patrons on both platforms. Remember, as Philip Pullman said, after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are the thing we need most in the world. Let's spread the story love. Until next time, this is Lucinda Sage-Midgorden. Thanks for listening.